So I want to talk about Last Night in Soho, and I have a few other ideas about the themes within this movie. First of all, I want to say that when you look at Last Night in Soho, it's very similar to the movie title Last Tango in Paris. And Last Tango in Paris was a very controversial Bernardo Bertolucci film where it featured a scene where a woman was being raped. And in that scene, what the director Bernardo Bertolucci said was that when Marlon Brando's character was told to do this to Maria Schreider's character, that he didn't she knew that it was going to happen in the script, but she was not kind of told when because because he wanted a initial response from her, so it sounded more realistic. And I think it's very interesting, like how like Last Tango in Paris like has an infamous rape scene, and also Last Night in Soho was about somebody with rape PTSD. So there could be kind of like because they're similar in titles. Maybe there is kind of like a connection between the movies, and I think like the connection could kind of be, like I said, that people who are naive because the main character Sandy, her backstory. I mean, like she's Ellie sees Sandy, and Sandy is a character in the 1960s who wants to be a musician, and she finds this guy, and this guy's actually a pimp, and he says like you want to be successful in nightclubs, you have to like sleep with all these men, and she ends up doing that, and she ends up getting like abused by him to make sure she does it until she actually murders her pimp. So I think like, and sometimes, and I hate saying this, but does happen that usually when women are put into prostitution, usually the pimp is the first person that they have sex with. Like the pimp is the person that rapes them just to expose them to the business, and then all the men that get hired to have sex with, all the men that pay to have sex with them, um, that's usually the continuous rape, because again they're forced into a life where they have no choice. If they say no, the pimp is going to beat them. But I will say that I think that when you look at Last Tango in Paris and you see the controversial rape scene, the unexpected, and you also look at Last Night in Soho and like how this woman Sandy thought that this guy was helping her when he wasn't helping her. He was just setting her up, and then she ended up being raped like hundreds of times. It almost is like it's almost like it's similarities. Like some people would say that if you watch the film The Deer Hunter and then you watch the film Taxi Driver, both films Robert De Niro is a Vietnam War vet. In Vietnam in The Deer Hunter, and then in Taxi Driver coming home. So some people say like it's almost like a linear story when you look at the films together. But maybe when you look at Last Night in Soho, because there's similarities between Last Tango in Paris and the subject matter, one could say maybe it could be a continuation, because even at the end of the Last Tango in Paris, Maria Schreider's character kills Marlon Brando's character at the end. So there could be like parallels between like it could be a continuation of the story, or there could be like, oh well, this is almost like a deconstruction of Last Tango in Paris. Because in Last Tango in Paris, it really focuses on Marlon Brando's character and his toxic relationship abilities, and how he is sympathetic in many ways because he lost his wife to suicide and he doesn't know how to cope with it. Like the film is there to make him look sympathetic when obviously his character Paul raped somebody in the movie. The next thing that I want to say, when you look at Last Night in Soho, is it's definitely a powerful film about mental illness and sexual assault. Let's say for example, you watch the film and you have this interpretation that you meet Ellie, she's going to London, and then she's in the car. She gets sexually harassed by this guy, like saying that she has nice legs. She could be a stalker. No, he could be her next stalker. And then later on in the film, she goes to the sorority, and the sorority, there are girls there who give her a drink at a party. There are parties where like people are having sex. There's a guy who comes back to her one of her sorority sisters. She shares a room with. So her sorority sister that she shares a room with brings a guy back, and they have sex in front of her. So maybe you can kind of say that off. You can interpret the movie like this: that maybe off camera, Ellie's character was raped, and she systematically suffers from schizophrenia. And then maybe at the end of the film, when you see the fire in the house, maybe it's not actually the older woman who caused it; it's Ellie who causes it. And then the ending, when you see like her having this very successful fashion shoot, it's almost like her dream sequence. The same way when people watch Taxi Driver, they're kind of like, the one interpretation is that Robert De Niro dies at the end of the film, and then the last scene is just him in his taxi talking to Sybil Shepherd's character, and it's all a dream sequence. So let's say like that's my interpretation of Last Night in Soho, where she actually dies, where it's actually a story about Ellie being raped or being roofied, and the whole film is just maybe her visions of the 1960s is just a metaphor for her rape. I think if you give it that approach, you can kind of say, well, obviously, she suffers from PTSD and schizophrenia, and there is something in mental illness where it's I would call it an acceleration mental illness where something bad happens to you in life. You already are prone to mental illness. You either have one or don't have one, or it's like you don't have one, but something will trigger you to develop mentally ill symptoms because something traumatic happened to you. I think that it could say like she developed schizophrenia, and clearly, clearly schizophrenia, and then maybe a bit of bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder, because those are like those are mental illnesses where a mood swing can happen and a person can become violent. But definitely, it'd be more so schizophrenia, like all the hallucinations, and then also just like a story about the past that nobody believe that a story about the past. How can you see a murder from the past in your vision? So if you kind of have that interpretation of it, then Ellie is a serious victim of possibly sexual harassment and then also sexual assault. When you look at this piece, obviously there's a bunch of women like having easy sex. Her sorority sisters. There's not a lot of like standing up for each other, and there's not a lot of looking out for each other. I think that there could be a sense that this takes place in the early 2010s prior to the 2016 Me Too movement. So you can kind of interpret this as early taking place early enough in time to say that okay, it could possibly be almost a true story about like rape and mental illness and how that's not really taken seriously. And unfortunately, the person pays who has the mental illness because nobody believes them, or they act so psychotic in their behavior that it takes away their credibility. And then the last thing is also you look at her life, like she is. Another interpretation could be that in addition to schizophrenia, she could be an autistic savant. Really good at fashion. Very, very strong creatively, and then also like she doesn't have many friends, and she is socially awkward, and those are those are symptoms of someone who's autistic, but it's not in every case. Autism is a huge spectrum, so you can even say that maybe she's possibly autistic, and then she got raped, and then she has some symptoms of schizophrenia, and maybe at the end of the film it's like she burned down the place, and everybody that she kind of cared about, like the person that wanted to be her lover and whatever, or that woman that took her in when she just wanted to get away from the sorority, maybe that's all just, it could be all looked at as her having a mental illness, her bringing her own life down, and the end of the film is just like, oh, well, she's dying, but that's a dream in her head, as she's dying type of thing, just like the movie Taxi Driver. I think the other thing that I would say, I think as a final thing, is, I just lost what I was going to say last, but I think this is a very well-made film. I think that, it does talk about the themes of rape and PTSD and very, very well. And if you interpret it like, a linear story and everything, all the hallucinations are metaphors for Ellie's own sexual abuse. But I think if you look at the film as, this person's having visions of the past, and all these visions are true, and she's the only one who sees it, then it's more like a story about, somebody who's trying to make peace with somebody in the past who suffered. And and I think that I think maybe the final thing that I remember is it's a thing about different generations. Like we talk about, like like it wasn't really until like the 1980s where child abuse and abuse towards women was treated very seriously, and then it jumped up in the 2016s. Because in the 1980s, it was the film The Shining that really actually, and Mommy Dearest, which actually showed like child abuse in a serious way and also abuse against women. And then it kind of shot up when Jodie Foster did that film where she was raped on a pinball machine, because it really kind of showed you the rape myths and all those other problems. So, films before then, if a character was raped, a woman was raped, it was not seen as such a big deal. It was seen as, okay, well, this happens, that's sad, let's move on to the next scene. There was a film called Boss Nigger, which was made in the 1970s. It's a blaxploitation film. And in Boss Nigger, there's a film where this woman is raped, but after it happens, they cut to what the guys are doing. So in a lot of old movies, it kind of taught the attitude of, well, if a rape happens, it's not really about the women. It's really more about, what's going on with the men or the men in their life, or if this is somebody's daughter who got raped or somebody with a lot of money who got raped, like how is the man going to get revenge for the daughter versus, the psychological damage it does to a woman. So, and that was also the culture back then, if a woman was raped, it was not really about her. It was more about the man in her life. How would her husband react? How would her brother react? How would her father react? And that's really, really sad, and that's really, really unfortunate because it kind of takes away from what actually happened to the person. So obviously, Sandy's character in the 1960s, because really no man cared about her. She almost had to digest everything, and obviously Ellie's character, the fact that she got sexually harassed by a cab driver. And, could she have been sexually assaulted at parties? I doubt that because the story is told more as a psychological horror type of thing. Her having hallucinations of the past, it's not really hinted that it's about her actually being sexually assaulted from drinks or whatever at parties. I really, really kind of think that, it could kind of just be about different times in history and how sexual assault's not treated as a big deal. Obviously in the 60s, a lot of women were sexually abused and nobody really cared. And then also in the 2010s, like the fact that she took a cab ride. The guy was making sexual commentary. You have nice legs. She covers her legs, and then she also says something like, he says, I could be your first stalker. Obviously, there were a lot of women in the 2010s that were very untrained. They just didn't know that you could easily report that to the police, or you could easily call an Uber. If it's like Uber apps or Lyft apps, you can kind of like say, this is what was said. I recorded it, or or the person says, yeah, I was just joking around, and then they don't get any more rides. But it kind of goes back to a time where it was very easy to get away with sexual harassment and also sexual assault. And I think the last thing I want to say, I think like my final point is the representation of race within this film. I was a little annoyed that she had a black boyfriend, a love interest, because usually in movies nowadays, like I am biracial, and I've been like mistaken for African American, but usually what I see in movies, and usually something that hurts me, is that I don't like almost like the forced featuring a black guy for racial brownie points. And also he has a line of, I know what it's like to be misunderstood or people to not understand me, something like that. And I remember watching like the Avengers years and years ago, and like there was like the thing, and there was this like time he went to a bar, and there was this woman who was black who said like, I understand what it's like to be different to people. So it was kind of like saying, well, black people and the Thing have something in common. Black people and a girl that has visions of the past has something in common. They're both kind of outcasts. So I kind of just didn't like that. And then also, I think that another thing that I would kind of say that bothered me a bit was like when she was in the house and she was having visions. It looks like she and Ellie and John were about to have sex. John's the African American. Is the African British. So it looks like what would have happened is because she's screaming and yelling because she's having visions of the past, and a mirror gets broken. That it kind of looks like that puts John in a lot of trouble because I think what a lot of people of my skin complexion or a lot of people who have black boyfriends or know black men and have met black men in their lives or black men watch this, that we all know what kind of happens in those situations where a girl is crazy and she's flipping out and there's a black guy there, and even if it's her friend, what's going to happen when somebody opens the door? They're going to say, oh my God, this is the black man who's raping her. And if it's the cops, that ends up with that person getting shot dead. Or if somebody opens the door and they have like some old racism where they say, oh, well, this black guy is here, they can be like, well, you're gone. And then the cops are going to like, easily justify it because we all know because of the rape myth that African Americans are sex crazed rapists. So I kind of didn't like that. I think that, overall they kind of made her boyfriend black because they wanted to appeal to this post 2016 audience. You have the woman that's the victim who's also trying to be successful, be an artist that's respected. And then also in some cases, like she is not the slutty sorority type. And then also she is not the, and she has mental health issues. And she clearly possibly has mental health issues. So it was appealing to the audience of the mentally ill. It was also appealing to the audience of seeing a woman that's trying to solve a crime. So the strong woman, and then also you have a black boyfriend, the token black, featuring a black guy for social justice points. And in this case, it was kind of like to just say that interracial couples or whatever is a good thing, and that there's some black people who are misunderstood, but they're trying to do the right thing type of thing, So, and a lot of movies you see that, like you have a secondary black friend. So I don't think that, and I also think like they did in the movie Taxi Driver and some other films like that, when you have a film that predominantly features one character, you have to have like maybe one or two scenes even with another character. So they could have just had a little bit more with John's backstory, or maybe like, maybe he faced some racism, but he stands up and he has some good character, just to kind of make it feel like he's not there as a throwaway type of thing, And I think like he is kind of a bit of a throwaway, I know it's mostly about Ellie, and this is such a very complicated story that you can't really feature another character because then it gets into, featuring too much. But I don't think how they handled a black character was right. I think it was just like the token, black, like white person with a black friend type of thing. And then also, I think that another thing that I would say is good is that when they were about to have sex and she was kind of flipping out, I think that also it could be kind of a metaphor for how sometimes and this is an issue in the black community, and I know this is controversial for me to say, is that there is always an issue. There is an issue of black men picking women that have mental health issues or crazy or misunderstood. And sometimes what happens is it ends up in situations where black men are in a shitload of trouble. And in this situation, it could have easily ended with him getting killed because, the Mrs. Collins, the older woman, could have walked in and said, okay, well, she's screaming, there's a black man. I don't know that they're friends, so more than likely he's raping her. Or if she called the cops and the cops came and said, oh, well, we know the stereotype of black men being rapists. This is Nat Turner 2010. They could have killed him. So I think that, it is an allegory for how, African Americans, pick bad women. That's not all African Americans, but that is an issue in the black community, and that's so much talked about on This Advice Show, Tommy Sotomayor, and other YouTube channels, and also this Not Be a Simp movement that's happening in the black community. So, if anybody sees this video and thinks that I'm being racist, no, I'm talking about a serious sociological issue, and I hope it's respected like that. So I think these are other talking points to Last Night in Soho. It's a very, very important film, I think. I think it's one of the best films that is an allegory for rape and rape PTSD, and also just like how it was not treated seriously in the past. And in some countries, it's not treated seriously now, but unfortunately in some Western countries, there's a lot more education, so women and other people know what sexual harassment is, what sexual assault is, so there's no confusion. and then also we are kind of more aware of the long term psychological harm those people face when they are dealt with these very egregious actions.